Hey, have you guys gone through old photos and videos during this time at home? Because I haven't done it fully. So that's what I want to talk about and briefly go through today. So as a bit of a backstory for me, I have been taking photos and videos for about three and a half years now. So I do have a backlog, like a whole library of footage that I have of course not fully edited down to the bone. I don't know what your method is for taking photographs or videos, but for me, I tend to go towards the overkill side where I'll take an extra 20, 30, 40 photos just so I can make sure that when I get home to edit them, at least one of them is something that I really like. So along that line of thinking, I'm pretty sure most of us have at least 1 or 2 folders with stuff that we can both revisit to re-edit, or we never even got around to editing it. So let's go to the computer and check them out. Alright, so I just spent quite a while looking over some really old photos and I selected 4 to both re-edit and talk about points that I would suggest people doing when revisiting old photos. Hopefully going over these images overall encourages you to dig up old photos, old videos, and just restyle them and kind of just look at them as well, because it's really cool, especially when it's been like a year, 2 years, looking back at photos that you took and remembering memories. So let's get into it. Starting off with this beautiful image from a trip to Switzerland. Now, unfortunately, I did get sick during this trip, and I think it's because I only took like 2 sweaters. So I was like double layering them with, I think, a long sleeve, and I was just struggling. But let's look at the before. So this is the before, this is the after. Now, I do have to clean some stuff up, and I do want to talk about composition. So let's jump into it. Don't ever be afraid to go in with the healing brush and cloning out stuff like this. So what I'm doing is, you see these dots right here? That's actually sensor dust. So taking off lenses from a mirrorless camera or a DSLR, stuff gets in there, dust and other random stuff. So you always have to be careful when taking off the lens. So you want to point your camera down, take off the lens and swap it out with the other lens as quickly as possible and carefully as possible, because if the sensor gets dirty, most of my images from this trip have those dots all over the picture. I mean, look, I can see one right here again. So I guess that's tip number 1. So whether it's photos or videos, if your sensor is dirty or if your lens on your camera phone is dirty, all your images, all your videos, and for video, of course, you can't just magically get rid of a certain area of the video. So you do want to be careful to always clean it. Now, most cameras have in the menu a sensor cleaning function. My Sony A7 III, it literally vibrates to knock down the dust that may be stuck on the sensor. And I also always carry one of those blower things. So these things, I've actually had this one for quite a while. I love it because this one isn't hard. I've seen some that it's like really hard to squish it for some reason. It's so weird. Just from a safe distance, maybe point the camera down, go like this around the sensor so that everything falls off, because it's a pain in the butt having to manually do this every photo. But that's why I left it here, because you do want to check to make sure everything is on point. So let's see. You see right here? Now, I didn't mention it, but I'm using Adobe Lightroom. It's what I've always used and what I'm comfortable with. I don't really use Photoshop too much. So before we move on to tip number 2, I do want to talk about the tragedy that I shot all of these photos for this trip in JPEG. So ideally, you want to shoot them in RAW so that, for example, if an area is too dark, you could bring up the shadows and you could see the detail because they retained it. I didn't do that, so the quality of these isn't too great. It's not bad at all, but you want to shoot in RAW, just FYI. So let me quickly take you through the settings. So I shot it at 35mm f14 because it was very bright, 1/125th of a second, ISO 100. So for my exposure settings, I didn't have to move too much. You know, it was just +0.1, contrast 15. I didn't have to bring down the highlights too much because, again, I shot it at f14, so there was less light going into the camera. The shadows I did bring up by 65, and you can see all of this here. Now for my tone curve, as you can see, I did bring up the left side. So what it does is it brings up the darkest parts of the image. So here, look, let me bring it down. Ooh, that's not good. Okay. So compare this, it's just really, really dark, to this. So it kind of softens it, and I'm sure you've seen plenty of photography that does this. I try not to do it too much, so maybe I can bring it down a little bit around there. Let me see the difference. Actually, like I was, I'll leave it there. Now for my saturation, I did bring down the blue because I'm not a big fan. So look, this is at 0. That looks really bad to me personally, so I brought it down. I just like the blues to be desaturated most of the time. Split toning, I didn't do anything. Sharpening, I didn't do too much either. And that's pretty much it, guys. So again, this was the before. and this was the after. So look at the dot over here. That's gone. Now the last thing, tip number 3, is composition. Before, I used to rarely crop. The crop tool, I would only use it to straighten the horizon and the image. Ooh, it's one of my biggest things. If I see a really nice picture, but it's crooked, like noticeably crooked, I'm just like, oh my God, you could have just taken 5 seconds to fix that. So, and I would never think about composition after the fact. Of course, you always want to think about composition, you know, when you're taking the picture, but you can always go when you're editing it to the crop tool. And for this one, there's vignetting here. There's a lot of negative space here and here that we can crop into. So I'm just gonna drag down here, and that actually got rid of the vignette over here. Now I can move this a little bit to the right, just to where the fence starts. So in my opinion, we got rid of unnecessary stuff in the picture. So the main focus is this beautiful rock right here, and the foreground is of course this grass and the fence, right? That's layer number 1. Layer number 2, which is amazing, is that you could see the winding road in between the clouds. So the clouds actually for about 5 minutes space themselves out to see the road way down below. So we were about 7,000 feet in the air, if I remember correctly. So again, layer number 1, main layer, layer number 2, and then layer number 3 is just more mountains, and you can see the little houses and the little roads and everything. So now in a perfect world, I would want there to be like a bunch of birds or some sort of subject here instead of just the clouds, which is partially why I just want to cut that out. You know what? I'm gonna bring this down to 0. Something else that I wouldn't do and I suggest people doing is bringing down the highlights or bringing up the shadows if it's necessary. So I would be afraid of cranking it all the way down to -100, the highlights for example, if an area was too bright, because I was just like, oh, the quality's not going to be good. But a lot of the times, especially if you shoot in RAW, it can handle it and the picture's going to look better because you brought down the highlights. So for this one, it's not really necessary because I exposed it pretty well, but you can still bring down the highlights. So it's at -25, but I can probably push it to -65 even. That's the difference. No, it's a little too dark, so I'm gonna do -40. That's it for this image. So let's export it. Let's just say Switzerland re-edit 2020 number 1. There you go. All right, so let's go through the 2 other pictures. So this one is from Italy. Now, originally, that's what it looked like. And I remember trying to edit it. First of all, again, with the blue skies, not a big fan. But then also here, the blue and the orange and stuff tones, I wasn't a big fan and I couldn't really find something that I liked. So now that I edited it, that's how it looks like, and I really like it. So tip number 5, I guess we're on. Always play around with the saturation. So if you don't like blue, hold down the blue. If you don't like the red, get rid of the red. So here I brought down the yellow all the way down. So here's gonna be at 0. Now that's -7. Can you imagine? I don't know why. So that's -42. So I literally brought it down all the way -100. So maybe I can add a little hint. And then the blue, I brought it down. So it's a big difference. As you can see from here to here, the contrast is 25, -100 highlights. So again, that's something that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't bring down the highlights all the way down. And yeah, let's see 4x5 how that would look. You see, I don't know if I'm a big fan of this right here. Who is this? Oh my God, I just noticed there's a person. All these years I never noticed. That's hilarious. Maybe I can go lower. So again, composition wise, you see the rule of thirds. You know, it's divided into 3. So foreground, middle ground. And again, if there was something in the sky, like some interesting clouds, that would be really nice. But I'm just happy that I came back to it during this time that I have time to edit, because it would have just sat on my hard drive for eternity and I would have never actually shared it. So now I have another one to share. I'm just gonna go back to as shot. Now this third one is a super simple one that I didn't really think about it too much. I think I was in a car, so I think I was moving and the sunset was amazing. So I just took like 2 or 3 pictures. So this is the original picture. So I made it very warm, got rid of the blues, brought down the highlights all the way to -100 and added some contrast, 15. Also brought down the exposure. And that's pretty much it. So if we look up here, shot with a 35mm f5.0, but then 1/1000 of a second. So since I was in a car, 1/1000 of a second is like, you know, you just take it in a fraction of a second. So there's no blurriness. And yeah, I love that there's a bird here. I wish it was more towards the left, but it's actually not bad. And then like I cropped it already. So I got rid of this right here because this line, this wave I wasn't a fan of. So then here I cropped it. This beautiful cloud forming is just like, it's so awesome. And then there's another one here. And then this bird, I like the bird and the warmness that comes from the sun. Overall, it's really cool. So I brought down the saturation -20. There, it was a bit too hot. So again, you could bring down the saturation. And yeah, I just remembered we didn't export this one. So Italy, re-edit 2020. And then here we're done with this one. This one was in Morocco. Morocco, re-edit 2020. And there you go. So again, these images were sitting on my hard drive for quite a while, and as a photographer, again, I always take a bunch of photos and videos. So I'm planning on doing this again, maybe next year or in 6 months, because images that we're taking the same day as these images, they can really benefit from a technique that I might learn in like 2 or 3 months from YouTube or from a photographer friend. So always be evolving, but don't forget to go back to re-edit so you can have more content, because there's no point in having everything just sit there. So there you go, guys. Just by visiting old hard drives, I was able to get some really good content that I can share with the world. So don't waste this opportunity. Let me know if you have any ideas for future videos, but that's it for this one. Remember to subscribe, share this video, like this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.